So you just got a new kayak. Now what do you do? So what are the top things you should do when you get a new kayak? Well, this is round 2. We're back at the lake here, just at a little local lake. We're gonna test some tolerances of this new Hobie Pro Angler 12 that I picked up from Eco Fishing Shop. We've got it rigged out to be a little bit better, but let's see what it used to be like last trip. And then we'll talk about why we made some of those changes. Well, we're out here for the first time with this Hobie PA12, and it is a huge deviation from what we've done in the past. I've typically been a small kayak guy, never owned a kayak this big. We're gonna build it out. We're gonna talk about some of the things that you need to do when you first get a kayak. And I'm gonna show you some of the stuff that we've rigged up. This is super bare bones. We're gonna walk through sort of where you need to start once you get your first kayak, and some tips from me on some of the things you probably shouldn't do right out of the gate. So let's hit the water and we'll talk about it some more. All right, so we just wet launched our boat here, just at a municipal lake here. Nothing crazy, but I'm gonna walk you guys through some of the initial things that I've done on this kayak. And we're gonna hit the water and kind of talk about it a little bit more. But we've put the live scope mount, we put everything on there, you know, it's tricked out. I've had live scope on kayaks before, and not really that crazy, but I wanna point something out, and this is gonna be tip number 1, right off the bat here. I didn't drill any holes for the graph, and I didn't commit to any new holes or any placements of that. This is all movable. I'm gonna get out there, I'm gonna get a feel for the kayak and decide where I want everything placed. I've actually got a black magic marker in there, and I'm gonna plan out where I think I want some of the ports, how far up I want this crossbar. It's really important, and that's why I always tell people to demo kayaks, to spend some time with a kayak prior to making any permanent changes to it. So right off the bat, tip number 1. So we just ran into our first problem, and this is what I'm talking about. You don't want to adjust it too much. So I've got the distance here. I'm a tall guy. I'm not going to deny that. You know, I'm 6'3". I've got these on 6 on the loops down there, and where we've placed the crossbar is going to impact how far I can push these forward. So I'm actually probably going to need to move this crossbar back just ever so slightly on the track so that I'm not clipping this. And I think a lot of mistakes people make is they outfit their kayaks out of the gate, and it kind of puts them in a position where they are pot stuck on how they have it and they can't really make adjustments. So this is usable, this is no big deal, but I think ultimately we're gonna have to move that back. So keep that in mind. Anytime you're rigging your kayak, you need to make sure that, you know, if you're a taller guy, you know, look how far back here in this seat, you know, on it, you got a lot of distance to travel there. So even though I'm a tall guy, I think ultimately I'm gonna have to adjust it a little bit. So anytime you first get on the water with a kayak, that's why I don't like the drilling holes. That's why I don't like to make anything, you know, permanent. This gives me the ability to adjust this, and I can probably do this on the fly. So we'll make some tweaks, and then maybe we'll do some fishing. So we've made some adjustments, pulled around. First fish in the new kayak is a mega dink. So this is one thing that, you know, I'll show you guys how we kind of have this rigged out of the gate. Is these are all my main graphs, and it's literally just running up there, right? And then it's just coming out of the hatch back there, and you can see some, I don't know, those look like crappie to me. Those are definitely like panfish, and then those might be like crappie or small bass, but you can see that, you know, I've just got this like rigged very non-permanently, and if you look at how much space I have in here, like, it's gonna take some adjusting to get this to where it needs to be, especially this. So like, we put the motor mount on here. This is just super not you know, it's super temporary. You can't actually even read the LCD from this angle, so that's something I'm gonna have to adjust. You know, we got stuff over here, like I don't even actually have this permanently affixed. So one thing I will point out is I'm not getting much speed out of the Newport. So that's another thing you gotta tweak, because, you know, I've just got it on there in the back, mounted just on the one objective mount back there. So there's a lot of things that I think, you know, you could go to a dealer, you can get an out of the box rig tell them how you want it, and you're gonna sit down and you're gonna make changes, because that's just what happens. So let's keep fishing. So second fish in the kayak, I just want to take a second here to chime in that one of the big things that you'll probably need to adjust to is just where you want, let's say you're putting a live scope pole on there, you're putting a Boonedox Crossbar. Being able to be comfortable to land the fish, you know, what you're used to, is going to really dictate where exactly on the kayak you're going to place a lot of this stuff. So that's why I said at the beginning of this video that you really do need to sit down, fish it before you do anything permanent, because I'm already looking at a few things here that I'm going to change, such as position of this, where the crossbar is, etc. So first fish in the kayak, not a very good one, but there's still a lot of time to catch more. Wow, we actually got a decent fish. All right, that's a first decent fish in the kayak. Caught it on the Z-Man fatties, bouncing it through some grass off a point. So probably like a 16.5. Could maybe get it to touch 17, but let's let her go. Not a bad start. It actually didn't suck. So we just got off the water, and a few things that I kind of want to talk about. First of all is going to be the motor. This right here is the NK180. You've seen it in my other videos. You're going to have to tinker with it. Every kayak's different. If you notice how much higher this is off the water than my Crescents, I had to play around with it a little bit. The top speed we got on this kayak after tinkering was 4.6 miles an hour. So that's without foot steering. I think you throw foot steering in there, you might gain some, because we were running it with the skeg and the rudder down. Additionally, loading and unloading, it's gonna take some time. You're gonna have to get used to it. I mean, when you get a new kayak, the tolerances on how you pull something in and out is going to be a lot different. So as you can see, there was a lot of changes that we made to this, and I'm gonna walk you guys through some of them before we hit the water, and then we'll talk about them a bit on the water. We'll actually do some fishing. So the first big change here is we moved this graph back to give, I'm tall, so I needed to scoot the bar back to give myself a little bit more room there. It's still not perfect though, because we can't open the hatch. So you can see, like, there's a lot of little things that you're never really going to get right the first time. That's why I never make anything permanent. However, we did do the through-hole wiring, as you can see there. Looks like I need to actually redo it. It popped out a little bit. That's easy fix, but changed that. We moved the battery to the front. We changed the pulley on this to be a pull forward and drop. That's TBD, but I'm going to be putting in foot steering, so that'll change things up a little bit there. We moved the black pack back behind the battery. Instead of the battery being back there, the black pack is back there. Gives you a little bit more clearance, gives you a better angle here on the GoPro, which you can see. So you get more of that frontward view when you do it like that. We still have a few things we're going to add to this, which we'll fast forward to the garage here in a bit and talk about. But since I like to fish the river and I'm going to be a crazy person to take this on the river, I'm actually going to put a paddle holder on there. Actually, I'll probably put it right here to put my bending branches paddle, and then we'll ditch these. We won't use those. We'll put the bending branches there, and I'll probably move this as well. I don't know what we'll do with that, but yeah, those are some of the tweaks we made to it. I'm going to hit the water and we're going to talk about it a little bit more As you can see, we're still running the 180 on this instead of the 300. So let's hit the water. So we're back. We've done 3 trips. Let's talk about it. If you've been following along, this is our 3rd trip in this kayak. We just got back from a river trip, which was interesting, but I wanted to take this on the river because we had done 2 lakes. I wanted to see what this giant Pro Angler could do in a little bit of current. And we had it rigged with the Newport 180, which we'll talk about a little bit. But the format of this video is a little different because I wanted to show you guys the evolution of some of the changes we made, why we made those changes, and you guys can learn from it, whether you're a seasoned kayak angler who's just picking up a new kayak or you're just now getting into kayak for the first time. This should give you a baseline on some of the things you can expect to change. So right off the rip here, let's talk about batteries and the Newport 180. If you've watched the video in its entirety, we weren't getting a lot of speed in our first trip. By the second trip, we were getting around that 4.5 to 5 mile an hour mark, and that's because I shifted some of the weight. And when you first go and you pick out a kayak, you probably don't necessarily think about where you want everything. You go to the dealer and you might say like, rig it out for me, I want the works. And they might rig both batteries in the back. Obviously that's something you can talk to them about, but until you've had time to actually play with the tolerances of the kayak, is really gonna dictate where you put a lot of stuff. Weight means a lot in a kayak. The more weight you have to the back is going to impact how fast you can go. So what I like to do is I like to keep my heaviest batteries in the front. For instance, if I am running my 100 amp hour 12 volt to power my electronics, which we'll talk about in just a second, I also like to put this in the front and kind of shift some of that weight forward to keep the nose down. You'll gain a little bit of speed about doing that. I see a lot of first-time anglers who pick up a kayak, they put everything in the back, they have the big black pack in the back, they've got a billion rods, they got their motor battery, and then they're sitting here and they weigh 220 pounds, you know, big guys, and their kayaks are sitting barely out of the water in the back with their nose forward, and they're wondering why they're not getting a lot of speed. So rule number 1, take it out, see what the weight distribution is, go from there. I highly suggest putting some weight in the nose of that kayak just to keep it down, if possible. Not all kayaks you can do that on. So let's talk about some of the mounts and some of the things that I learned just from doing this bare bones build. So up here in the front, I've got the Boonedox bar here, we've got a paddle holder here, we've got our throttle here. All pretty average things, you see them on a lot of kayaks, but placement is going to be a big deal, trust me. Short guys aren't going to want to reach really far. Tall guys aren't going to want to be hitting this, which you saw me doing in our first trip out. So I've actually got this in what I call the sweet spot because it's high enough that I can get full extension on the pedals, but still gives me that in close view that I want. One of the tweaks that I talked about in the video was that we're going to add a paddle clip. Now this one here actually overlaps with the hatch. You can see that you can't actually open the hatch when this is on there. But if you're on the river, I like quick access to my paddle. You gotta have it because it's dangerous if you don't. So having it here worked out for me because as you can see with the throttle here, it doesn't necessarily hit it. So that's why I put it at an angle. Now one major change that I might be making with this rig is I actually might tilt this in slightly so that I have a better read on what speed I've had. I actually noticed that when I was going down the river, I was getting a little bit of glare. So if you tilt that in, just ever so slightly, it'll be easier to access and change your speed while still being able to read really well. So we already kind of talked about the weight distribution, but I've got my live scope mount here in the front. But drilling is like a big thing. Like once you've figured out where you want everything, that's when you drill the holes, not before. I have known a lot of people that have drilled and then decided to change their mind. Like this live scope mount, I wasn't sure where I necessarily wanted it until I went out there on the river, until I was out on the water. I actually ended up moving this forward some to free up more space here so that it wasn't like in my lap essentially. And that also makes it easy too, because when I pop the live scope mount off, I can just sit it just like this underneath where the rod storage is, and it fits there perfectly. It's perfectly good. So I was really happy with this, but if you saw the first build, you might notice how much further I've moved that up. So I really suggest that if you're a first-time kayaker, you've never really been in a kayak and you want to rig it out like this, take a black magic marker like we talked about, mark where you think you want everything while you're on the river. You can literally just have your cables hanging out and just shut the lids on it. That's what I do with every new kayak build. I never drill, I always go with just the wires laying on it. And I go to somewhere where I'm comfortable, and I don't really fish a ton, you know. There was some fishing in this video. We did catch some fish. To kind of wrap this up, I think the moral of the story here is you really should focus on demoing kayaks, taking them out before you make any permanent changes. Some of the tolerances that I've kind of talked about in this video, I hope kind of help you, guide you in making decisions on where you want some of these things permanently affixed. If you watch any of my 2 videos prior where I show you my walkthrough on the CK2 and the Scopin, that could give you some inspiration too on some things that work on those types of kayaks. I will point out that I have picked up a new lighter battery. This is the Lifetime 24 volt, 25 amp hour battery. The sucker weighs just under 13 pounds, and it's really gonna help in a kayak that's already pretty heavy, and I'll be able to kind of loosen the load a little bit because it's actually lighter than the 12 volt, 100 amp hour I have in the front. So I'm able to just kind of sit this right here, and I just put the strap over it like that. Pretty simple, and honestly, it works great, and it keeps the weight on an already pretty heavy build down a little bit. So those are kind of the bare bones, guys. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to send me a message or leave a comment, and I'll try to answer as many as possible. I basically did this because I wanted to show you guys my thought process on getting a blank canvas, a brand new kayak, to take it out on the water the first time, make some adjustments in day 2, catch some fish on day 2, take it on the river, which is a completely different experience, finalize some of that stuff, and this is what we get. Now, I will still probably make some tweaks to this, but I'm pretty happy with where it's at, especially with like the pulleys and stuff like that. I see a lot of people when it comes to like the motors, put a lot of these on permanently and then realize that they don't really like that. I did that myself with the Scopin. I initially put my motor on as a pull and then decided I wanted it as a pull towards me instead of pulling away. Whereas on this, I actually really like it as a pull away just because the kayak sits a little bit higher off the water and you've got that leverage to pull it up. And just to point out, I'm sure I'll get this question, I currently run the NK180 on the Hobie in the fixed position and then steer with the rudder. Anyways, that kind of wraps it up, guys. Like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them down below, and I'll see you guys on the water.